South County. We all need a night at the Ocean Mist. I mean, that's an intervention that has to take place. It should almost be state law.
Pat, I wish I could have named all of the businesses in South County because they all contribute greatly.
Right, exactly. Make it a point this summer to at least 2 or 3 times go down and patronize a locally owned South County business. You know, they're an important member of the community, sometimes upstate, if you will, for a 44-mile state. We tend to forget about it. We tend to obsess about all things Providence. Providence is a wonderful city, but there are lots of other things to do, and particularly after this winter, we need South County. So thanks for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Myrna.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
There you go. So lots to talk about. Hopefully, folks, if you're listening to the show, if you listen to the podcast, spread the word, and let's make it happen. And let's remind Gina that, you know, big government, Providence-based government isn't the answer for anything. Speaking of not answers for anything, we only got a few minutes left, Dave Fisher. We kind of flipped the show on its ear today in terms of scheduling. Normally, we engage in our host-to-host banter at the beginning of the show, which I know is a highlight of the show for many of our listeners.
Most people turn it off after the first 20 minutes.
There you go.
If they can make it that long.
Again, last week we had Stephen Brown from the ACLU on, and he did a wonderful job in really taking us step-by-step both through the history, the content, the approach, the successes of the American Civil Liberties Union. And I think he did yeoman's work in really making it accessible to people because so many people paint the ACLU in broad brushes based on whatever their own individual perspective is. And I use that term perspective very loosely. One of the issues that came up this week before the
perception or perspective?
Well,
there's a difference.
First, whenever we use the Phoenix as a source of humor, we all give all credit to those who came before us, of course, Philippe and Jorge. So at Halitosis Hall this week, one of the great debates was, of course, about school choice. Now, you would think, as someone who's allegedly conservative, I'd be all in favor of that, wouldn't you?
That seems to be the way the wind blows on your side of the political aisle, yeah.
There you go. And particularly as someone who has suffered through, and by the way, it's been worth every dollar if anyone from Lincoln is listening, but who has suffered through a considerable investment in private education. You know, despite the fact that I pay copious tax dollars that is supposed to provide an education for my children, and I'm not bitter at all. Yeah, okay.
Not for that reason, anyway.
Yeah, I'm bitter. Thank you, Cumberland. So let's flip conventional wisdom on its ear. There are those who truly believe that school choice is somehow a panacea. It's the golden ticket, if you will, to furthering the education of their children. And that may be true on, I'll call it a superficial level, but let's talk about the ramifications. First of all, the legislation that was being considered this week would have provided, I believe, for a $6,000 voucher to be used by the poor and the disadvantaged or the middle class at any one of a number of schools. So
the soon-to-be poor and disadvantaged.
That would be me. Let's be blunt. $6,000 is not going to buy you Moses Brown or Lincoln School. No. $6,000 is going to go towards probably a parochial school education. As in any...
Well, some of those are up there, too. I mean, Mount St. Charles is pretty expensive these days.
True. And they all these institutions provide wonderful educations and reflect the growing cost of education. But let's talk about the unintended consequences. The first and most obvious of which is that taxpayer dollars are drained away from public schools. The original concept of public school, please correct me if I'm wrong, Dave, was that an equal high-quality education would be afforded to all.
For all.
Right, all, regardless of ethnic background, heritage, religion, and individual economic circumstances. Fair statement?
I would agree with that, yes.
All right. So for a system that's already hemorrhaging cash, for some for legitimate reasons, other can argue for non-legitimate reasons, for systems that hemorrhaging cash, is the way to repair it to remove more money from the system?
Well, I guess that depends on who you ask.
All right, but
certainly my mayor is very much in line with getting her mayoral academy set up in the idyllic northern Rhode Island environs.
The village of Woonsocket. So, but we can agree that on a practical level, when clearer heads prevail, taking millions and millions of dollars away from school systems isn't really helpful, is it?
No, it's rather counterintuitive.
Okay. So the second step, of course, is the justification. Is there anything to believe that the education of children will increase exponentially for those left behind?
No, in fact, I think there have probably been dozens and dozens of studies that say exactly the opposite happened.
Okay.
You know, where you now have an exodus of students out of a school, which therefore cuts their funding even further if you're going to go on a per-student basis. I mean, what do we spend in the state of Rhode Island? About $12,000 per student per year.
Right. So now, then let's take it one step further. If you've got students who are being removed from the system and they're going elsewhere, they're probably going to some type of school that's parochially based, correct?
In the state of Rhode Island, sure.
Okay. So if you are, quote unquote, an advocate of liberty, a strong defender of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, at what point in time does it make sense for the taxpayers of Rhode Island to effectively subsidize religious education?
That's absolutely absurd. And, you know, one of the things that caught my eye that went through the General, or didn't go through the General Assembly this year, was the fact that, tax money is going to pay for school books and busing for several religious academies across the state, which I was like, wait a second, shouldn't we not be doing that with the whole separation of church and state thing?
Well, and again, I mean, if you're saying to me that these institutions will not force an involvement in religious education, then perhaps another level of debate can happen. If you're saying to me that these schools voluntarily stop performing religious education during class hours, then there's another debate. More important, you're saying to me that these same people who are advocating for this as some sort of silver bullet approach will then spend an equal amount of time being intimately involved in the curriculum of their respective school systems, which, pretty much clears out the room instantly. If you're saying to me that these people will be intimately involved in the creation of a truly fair method of analyzing school performance, and at the same time analyzing teacher performance and rewarding those teachers commensurately, then I'm interested. But if you're telling me that you're going to siphon off tax dollars to support religious institutions, I'm not interested. And I see that as a clear violation of the civil contract that was generated by the Bill of Rights and the Constitution between the American citizenry and its government, and a clear abrogation of their responsibility to maintain.
Ding ding on that one, abrogation.
Right. Maintain a divide between those two. There's a clear responsibility for that to happen. So I say nay.
I think I don't understand how anybody can look at that and not see the conflict.
Right.
It seems pretty straightforward.
Right. Absolutely. Folks, a couple things. Some housekeeping here. Up on the website now is day one of CannaCon that we participated. In the next day or so, you'll see our live blog and podcast from CannaCon Day 2.
Oh, it's all up there, man.
Oh, it's up there. Okay.
Oh, it's up there.
Okay. So if you haven't had a chance to listen, just some great interviews with members of the cannabis care community, as well as members of the businesses that surround them, things like CannaCare Docs, amongst others, some of the educational institutions that have risen up around that community. We've also, as I mentioned earlier, we've got our podcast from the Stephen Brown interview last week. Again, you've been listening to The Coalition at Facebook.com/Coalition Radio, on the Mighty Mighty Twitter, Coalition_radio, and CoalitionRadio.us. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.